I don't know about you, but I can't seem to scroll through my news feeds these days without seeing disturbing images of armed police in military grade riot gear violently beating the hell out of peaceful pro Palestine protesters. And this in places that proudly and increasingly more erroneously call themselves democracies, democracies that supposedly value both freedom of speech and the right to protest. Just a few days ago, in fact, a particularly shocking and surprising example of this kind of police state brutality took place in the Basque Country. The basic gist of it is this: a group of Spanish activists from the Global Summit Flotilla who were kidnapped by Israeli forces in international waters as they tried to get aid to desperate Gazans, and then subjected to violence and humiliation by Netanyahu's favorite psychotically xenophobic bully boy Itamar Ben-Gvir, were returned to Europe by the Israeli state. Upon arrival of the activists at Bilbao airport, on some spurious reasoning by the kind of bile-filled, insecure little fascists who can't get hard unless they're wearing a uniform and holding a stick, the police set about attacking them. These are people, don't forget, who were returning from being assaulted and imprisoned by a foreign rogue regime engaged in a genocide, and therefore not the kind of people to be bothered by the niceties of human rights and basic decency. The Basque government has since said it will launch a probe into the heavy-handed police response, but I think we all know what we can expect to come of that. Because these unhinged repressive tactics are being employed by state actors, it seems, almost everywhere. Austrian police forces, French police forces, Danish police forces, UK police forces, all have used disproportionate force against pro-Palestinian protesters, even when those protesters are pensioners or in wheelchairs. German police in Berlin have been particularly zealous in raining violence down on peaceful protesters, because apparently history is meaningless and learning from the past a complete waste of time. I hate to throw the word Nazi around, especially when it comes to Germany, but you can't help wonder at the gusto with which these heavily armed, uniformed bullies, their faces twisted with utter contempt, go about punching and hitting unarmed protesters. This is Nazi behavior. Just because this time you happen to be using Jewish people as an excuse to crush a certain section of society, rather than crushing the Jewish people themselves, that doesn't mean you're somehow not a Nazi. Violent persecution is violent persecution. It doesn't matter who's on the end of your kosh. And by the way, it shouldn't need saying, but using the Jewish people as nothing more than a handy cover for your violence is an insult both to the Jewish people living now and to the memory of those your great-great-grandpa threw into a gas chamber. But sure, go ahead with your audition to be the bad guys in all the movies they start making in 20 years' time. Let's be clear about something. This deranged brutality against the citizens who, remember, pay its salary isn't something that the police just got up one morning and decided to do. They are acting on orders from above, or at least they enjoy its implicit permission. This violent attack on free speech and the right to protest is, crucially, state-sanctioned violence. It has to be. What I've been obsessing over lately is why. Why have police bodies across Europe seemingly been given the green light to use this terrifyingly excessive level of force? Why such apparently overwhelming hatred for people who are essentially calling for the end of a genocide? Why the batons? Why the tear gas? Why the attack dogs? Why such uncontrolled levels of unbelievable savagery? This is what I think. Pro-Palestinian protests are a massive irritant to governments who hate to be reminded of their very obvious complicity in a genocide that they had calculated, perhaps even hoped, would have been over and done with by now. It simply makes them look bad. Political leaders are furious that the authentic beliefs of these protesters make their moral posturing look like the empty performance that we can all see that it really is. Honestly, I can't help but wonder if our governments were just waiting for Netanyahu's hardline administration of rabid nationalists to just kill all the Palestinians so that then they could tut tut and wag their fingers from the sidelines in somber censure while breathing a massive sigh of relief that this massively inconvenient and politically awkward situation was finally out of the way. I'd imagine that was especially the case when it came to the UK, whose presence in the region since World War I basically laid the geographical and political groundwork for the creation of Israel and everything that has befallen the Palestinian people ever since. Anyway, the plan, I imagine, was once that carefully measured period of finger wagging was over, with perhaps maybe just a few extra sanctions thrown in there, for the look of the thing, countries could then start to say that their pretend punishment of Israel was over, and that for the good of the future, we had to rebuild bridges, put the past behind us, move forward, etc., etc. By which governments only ever really mean one thing: trade, business. Now let's be straight here. I don't mean business in that dumb, retrograde, anti-Semitic trope favoured by frothing racists and far-right conspiracists of secret Jewish cabals manipulating the market. No, I mean business in the way that everywhere you go in the world, wherever you see corruption, wherever you see repression, it's almost always about the money involved. It's always about business and which greedy corporate leech is sucking up all the profits into their slavering, gaping maw. So, in essence, to be pro-Palestinian is an explicit condemnation of foreign complicity in genocide, and the often economic motivations behind that complicity. And in too many cases in the EU, that is seen as a condemnation of your own government. Thus, the boot heel. Thus, the violent repression of opinion. Thus, the prescription of protest groups as terrorist organizations, even if these moves ultimately fail because they are clearly unlawful. Thus, the suggestion that some protests should be banned. Not far-right ones, though, of course. They can have rallies and everything because the British flag. Thus, attempts in places like France to criminalize and silence pro-Palestinian solidarity. These moves themselves are part of a wider campaign by international governments to curb any kind of protest whatsoever, of course. But it's nice to be able to pretend that your silencing of dissent is really only about preventing anti-Semitism, because actually you care about equality, even while you actively engage in the kind of anti-Islamist rhetoric that sees Muslims openly attacked and abused in the street by regressive knuckle-draggers who now think that they've been given permission to be openly sociopathic. So, Western governments are angry at the Israeli regime, not for its genocide, but for its failure to complete its genocide quickly. And again, just so we never lose sight of this, for making their complicity so glaringly conspicuous. However, since, for reasons of trade and whatever other lies and weak excuses they've come up with, Western governments can't actually take that fury out on the Israeli regime. So instead, they take it out on their own citizens, or at least the ones who dare to throw their hypocrisy in their faces. This is probably what drove the, for once, widespread and vocal political outrage over Ben-Gvir's treatment of those captured flotilla activists. He made the current Israeli regime's barbarism too evident, too undeniable. Just like those IDF soldiers kicking statues of Jesus, or Israelis caught on camera attacking Christians. That kind of moronic posturing, which can only have arisen from a revoltingly entitled sense of impunity and untouchability, and which is a direct result of international bodies just standing by and doing absolutely nothing to lift a finger in aid of the Palestinian people, or criticize Israel in any way whatsoever. That kind of posturing just gets in the way of cracking down on pro-Palestinian movements because it proves those movements are right. You see, the useful thing about Gazan atrocities and the torture of Palestinian prisoners is that thanks to the blanket refusal of the Israeli administration to allow access to foreign journalists, all of that horror conveniently happens behind an impenetrable curtain. No one can see inside. So that violence against Palestinians remains an abstract, even though we all know what's happening beyond the curtain and that it is as horrifyingly real as it gets. But Ben-Gvir just took a massive dump over that illusion, which makes the actions of those Basque police officers at Bilbao airport even more egregious. It didn't have to be that way. By contrast, activists who arrived on the same day at El Prat airport in Barcelona were received with kindness and respect. Mind you, unlike in Bilbao, political representatives were present in Barcelona, so the police were likely more conscious of keeping themselves in check. Still, that said, just one single measured response to pro-Palestinian activists, it's not enough. And I fear we are going to see a lot more police batons cracking pacifist skulls because the governments of the West are now locked in. They've made their choice, and they know it's the wrong one. But rather than admit error and change course, in their stubborn refusal to accept accountability, they have instead doubled down, opting to viciously silence dissent. In truth, of course, they are trying to silence their own guilt. But it won't work, at least not for long. Revulsion of the genocide is widespread and diverse, and it's getting louder by the day. In the meantime, those of us who believe that Palestine must be free can expect more violence from a political class desperate to drown out the sound of its own culpability, of its own venal immorality. And drowning is the right word, because soon enough history will show that complicity with the Netanyahu regime was a pair of cement boots that our blinkered leaders willingly, foolishly put on their feet in order to go paddling in the Red Sea.